I show you a good sky. It could hold a fleet of geese above a kite, sipping in a breeze, or foliate the wind with leaves of cherry wood and hedge. Look, it will blanket your sleep with mirrors of stars in the slow undressing of night. It will love you solely through the Venus dawn, rubbing your eyes awake the moment before the day's light hangs its spars. I show you a good sky. It will rain its reflection along your troubled eye, the one that blinks each time a hawk rants by. I am no one's romantic. No, I am the sky's shadow wish, writing this only to breathe its light. I show you a falling sun, passing like a lover, to be near you, allowing no star or bulb on a corner lamp to possess you as you are. Look, here I am, the sky's moon down. I will shape a horizon out of peaks like none your memory has ever carved. I show you a good sky. Its broad, broad blue ribbon will wrap its mind around your eye's imagination and tease you into smiles. Now, be patient. Let your grieving rest a while. Well, you know, sometimes when I talk with my students, I talk about the private mythos. That in many ways, as poets, we are myth makers and we are myth breakers. You know, Camus picked up the myth of Sisyphus and gave his turn on it from what was originally there by Homer. You must imagine Sisyphus happy. So in a sense, poets do that. We really take myths. The private mythos is all of what has shaped us from birth till the present, memory of what that is. It's a reservoir of experience that some new writers don't know that they can tap. It's a reservoir. It's just there. And I always looked at experience, and especially poetic experience, as being persistent. I can write a note. I mean, the reason we carried shoulder bags in the 60s is because we always had the books we were admired, we were reading, and we always had our notebooks ready to write lines and write a poem wherever we were. We were just doing that automatically. And sometimes you would write down a line. You know how it is when you wake up in the middle of the night, oh, I love this line, I'm inspired. You write it down the next morning, you wake up and say, who the hell wrote this? This is junk. But in effect, when you're writing an idea, or a line, or a stanza, or a title even, the fact that it persists and gets written is where that poem, that experience of that poem has started way back when, and it's always there, and finally it finds itself to the page. There's something I very rarely talk about. I never think it's important until recently I began to think about it. When I was 24, because I played sports, I had cancer, and it was a cancer that came from a doctor who had given me an overdose of radiation for some bone spurs I had in my foot from basketball hitting the floor a lot. So it wasn't something in me, but something that was given to me. And I remember how I had to face my own mortality in those years. It was 2 years of suffering that I had to go through physical. And I can tell you, I thought I was living before, but the word passion has never been more important in my life than it was after that. You couldn't stop me. I was passionate about life. I wanted to be out into the world. I wanted to live poetry rather than just write it. You see, that was more of let's say, the impulse that really took me on into the international world in many ways. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to write about it. I wanted to experience people and just experience, just to know it, to live the poetry. I still remember getting a letter inviting me to come to Moscow for the first International Poetry Festival. And they were Raphael Alberti, Ernesto Cardinal. They were naming people who were invited and accepted. And of course, and then Bob Dylan was going to be invited, although he was a little bit, he wasn't so ready to do that. Robert Bly was another person, and then myself, and then Seamus Heaney. I remember the State Department pretty much saying, don't go. So it wasn't just that, oh, let's go and do this. The honor was there, but I was never certain whether this was a time when communism was really heavy in Russia. Gorbachev had just come in. He hadn't even, brought the words glasnost and perestroika into the vocabulary yet. And we had to make a big decision. And I remember even having a talk. I think I did. I think it was like a short talk with Dylan himself, because I had never met him, but I loved his work. Almost convincing him that it would be okay if we did this. I think there were a lot of questions. Well, should State Department thinks that we'll be, first of all, set up, and that we'll be, our luggage will be checked, and we'll be censored, all these things, and then they'll use us. But we went, all right? None of those things happened. And I can tell you this now. So just to play it how it happened, we went there, flew over, and I still remember the poems that I read, and how nobody was censoring it. No one was changing it. Yevtushenko actually translated several of the poems to be read, of mine. And I still remember Dylan was right up in front of me. I even have the photographs because my interpreter took photographs of me over my shoulder while he was up. And I was next up after him, and I still remember thinking, how do I do this? I'm going to follow Bob Dylan. And the only thing I can think of is that, okay, they won't be expecting much of me. I'm the young kid on the block here. But I thought, I speak Russian. What's wrong with me? So I spoke to the audience in Russian. I said something like, Moy matka I otec narodzili u Humene. My mother and father were born in Humene, Czechoslovakia. Yevgeny Yevtushenko narodzil u Zima Junction. Yevtushenko was born there. Un moy brat, he is my brother. I said something like, well, the audience went crazy. They loved this, right? So now I was accepted to be able to read, and I got through it and did very well. Well, coming off the stage, I still remember Dylan. He's the sweetest, most humble, wonderful person. I can't say a bad thing about him. I remember coming off the stage, and he said to me, he says, Jim, I don't belong here. I mean, he actually said those words, and I looked at him and I says, are you joking? You've read for 100,000 people to call a scene. What are you talking about? I don't belong here. And it was just how he said it. He says, I'm a song lyricist. It was something like that. I'm just paraphrasing what he was really saying. But it was the humility of that moment. About a year later, maybe 2 years, I get a call from a reporter from the New York Times. And the first thing he said was, listen, do you know that evening when you all read in Moscow for that, because it never repeated, there was never a second International Poetry Festival in Moscow, that was the only one, was historical, that you were really part of history. And we understand that you might even have an audio tape of the readings, which I actually did have, because the interpreter had, I was smart enough to say, would you record the reading there? He says, well, we didn't know it. We were there, but we didn't know then what we know now, that this was Gorbachev's possible first foray into glasnost was that night. It made all the sense in the world. What this reporter was saying, we'd like to have the audio of that because Gorbachev had already started thinking perestroika, and he needed a venue for it, and that this was possibly the first venue for glasnost, an openness. And we realized no one had censored us, no one had checked our luggage, no one had done any of the things that we were told by the State Department that could happen. So in effect, I was really proud of that moment. I just always remember what Eliot said. He says, you must never remember the poem, you must relive it. And so many times that was important to me, even in my recitation, when I would recite poetry from the memory, was that I would be reliving it. I read a lot. And I didn't want the readings just to be a reading of words on a page. I wanted to engage the audience. I wanted to relive the experience of that poem. And every time it was different. 1 or 2 lines, it would take me off someplace. I'd read a poem about my father, breath, and I'd be in tears maybe by the end of it, because it would just make me go back to the lines themselves. So memory plays a big role for me there. Another aspect of that is growing up in the Czechoslovakian heritage and the Slavic heritage, and knowing how many people like Havel or Russian poets and others would have to go to jail. They had to memorize their work. They would write their work through memory in jails. People possibly don't even think of it that way. Or they never knew when they would be confiscated, so they had to remember their work that way. So a lot of their poetry was reciting. It was not the drama of it. It was more the fact that it was a pragmatic thing to do as well. When I was younger, my father loved trains, and so he would take me on trains from Humene up to Bratislava to Prague, and there would always be a loaf of bread, and he'd slice that up, and wine and an apple that he never stopped cutting. But it was like a library to me, and I remember in Prague seeing the Hunger Wall, and being of this heritage, and my father and my mom coming over in 1929. It was about, the Hunger Wall was a wall built for the poor by King Charles IV, because he wanted to pay them, so he had to build a wall so he can pay it. And my father came over with my mother in 1929, middle of the Depression, with my brothers and sisters, several of them. So I wrote this poem, The Hunger Wall, about that wall over the Vltava River, beautiful river in Prague. After walking to the bridge at Karlova, we found the river where at dusk the swans dipped their beaks into the falls for sanctuary. The trees closed in for shade. We gazed through willows to the opposite hill, a single light from a room growing thick with sadness. Solemn smoke now cooked the evening meal. We were just about to treat our hunger well when, out of sunlight undeclared, a shaded massive stone began to stretch its neck along the slope. It would scan the water for a quarter hour before the foliage rubbed its throat, some internal hunger now assuaged, for only moments. Then again, the impulse thumbed like whalebone on a drum. The poplars began to rustle. A hawk, spiraling like an aspen, deep in chatter, betrayed its nest to block the sun. The dam below rose up to bolder water, as if to show how easily wars are won. They feed the hunger wall, the waitress points the fingers in her skirt, rubbing coins, her hands are shoring up to feed the past. I don't want the poor to endure me, she said, King Charles said to those he paid, as he watched their faces building borders, hunger for a wall, as she faced the smoldering Vltava River, watching hunger well.